Well, hi. So I'm here with Professor Dr. James Maffie, who's the author of a book we reviewed a long time ago. That I probably should have done this back when I read it 2 or 3 years back, so it'd be a little fresher on my mind. But Aztec philosophy, which is interesting. So you have, and it's. I was wanting to bring my copy to show it off, but I'm noticing it's on the shelf right behind you with the cover visible. So I'm glad that
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
glad
Yeah.
that we can see it. And I'd love to hear some of
There.
your book. Like, one of the reasons I was so like interested by it is like I was a comparative religion guy at Swanee, and then like now I'm more of a Jungian leaning therapist. I do some more. I think the newer neurology is actually validating the older Jungian phenomenology
Uh-huh.
in a way that we probably won't rewind the clock and give anybody the credit they deserve. But so I'm always into that stuff, and I love mythology. And but Aztec mythology was always kind of hard for me to intuitively get because there were so many like cultural distinctions. You know, some of that regional, some of that economic. That they
Uh-huh.
just look different, and that affects culture differently.
Uh-huh.
And reading your book, it's like, oh, that's it. Like, this is the thing that makes the art make sense. This is the thing that makes the ritual make sense. This is the thing that makes economy make sense.
Uh-huh.
Um, so the title, like when you named it Aztec philosophy, was that kind of a practical thing, and that you were trained in philosophy and wanted to publish there, or because it more of is kind of about metaphysics almost, or a
Well,
cultural kind of assumption? What was? Can you tell us about your process in writing that and conceiving of the book?
I mean, the book is about metaphysics, but metaphysics is a chapter of philosophy. But the book didn't get the title Aztec Metaphysics because the publisher thought no one would read it.
Hmm.
So that's why I have the broader title, and that's why in the introduction I make it clear that the book is addressing specifically the metaphysics, and that in a subsequent book I'll address the ethics.
Well, the a lot of some people may not be familiar a ton, you know, with all of Aztec culture. So I guess, and correct me where I'm wrong here, because most of the stuff I've read about, you know, it's not. I may be mispronouncing something, or I may not grasp it perfectly. But you know, the Aztec is actually the military, you know, imperial class of an empire. We use it to refer to a whole civilization, but the Mexica and the Nahua are going to be. Am I saying this correctly?
Uh, yeah, it should be Mexica
Mexica.
or
Okay.
Nahua.
Nahua.
Yeah,
So, and could you tell us a little bit about that cultural group, just the structure of the empire, before you get into, you know, the
sure.
philosophy part?
Well, the Aztec is a word that was given. It's a European word. I mean, it's not. It's a Nahuatl derived. The Nahuatl is the language of the Aztecs, or the Mexica, or more broadly, there's a whole ethnic group who are Nahuatl speakers, and they are collectively referred to as the Nahuas or the Nahuas. Um, and a German named von Humboldt decided to name them the Aztecs because they had mythically originated in a place called Aztlan, which is mythically northwest Mexico, southwest USA. And that is, in fact, where the people who we call the Aztecs, but they're properly the Mexica, they originated from. They and a lot of other Nahuatl speakers migrated down from that area of the southwest US, northwest Mexico in the 14th century. The language itself, Nahuatl, is part of what linguists call the Uto-Aztecan language. It's related to Luiseño, Cahuilla, Ute, Paiute, Comanche, and Hopi. So there's a whole language group there, and within Mexico, it's related to Huichol and Cora as well, and all the way down to San Salvador, El Salvador, the Pipil, which is an Uto-Aztecan language. So Nahuatl, that language became the lingua franca of the Mexica or the Aztec Empire. So the Mexica were one specific group who followed a guy named Tenochtitlan, and their capital city on the island was called Tenochtitlan after him, but they were not the only Nahuatl speakers. So, as I said, scholars refer to this whole sort of cultural, linguistic group of people as the Nahuas, because the sources that we have are not confined specifically to Mexica. They're post-conquest, and they are derived from interviews with a variety of Nahuatl speakers from around the Great Basin and the highlands of Mexico, that lake area, and where like 1 to 2 million people, Nahuatl speakers, lived. So the Aztecs weren't they were one of many groups who were Nahuatl speakers. They happened to form part of what's called the Triple Alliance with 2 other city-states. But yeah.
And so a lot of the Aztec culture that people are familiar with is probably like what we would imagine of like human sacrifice, festivals, pyramids.
Right.
And a lot of that stuff, I think, seems kind of alien until you understand some cultural assumptions. Because I was always like reading, trying to make those make sense. And some of the theories I just didn't really find plausible at all. Like there was somebody, in the 70s that wrote a paper, was like, well, they just didn't have a lot of meat.
Right.
So they kind of had to eat people, and it was like, well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's ducks, there's other stuff. There were some other people that were like, well, the religion was so strong that the people who were getting captured in the flower wars really wanted to be sacrificed. They thought that was great. Yet they did tend to side with Cortez and say we don't like the Aztecs. So I had a hard time kind of buying that. But I think your book makes a lot of the like assumptions that seem bizarre to us moderns or people that are coming from a more Western background make a ton of sense. That this concept of Teotl is like this energy that is constantly sort of roiling and devouring and sustaining itself, and that everything that the Aztecs are doing is a reenactment of that sort of implicit assumption about the way the universe works. I mean, you call it being on slippery earth. That we're always trying to, we're just a small stumble away from the sun not coming up, or water not being wet, or fire not being hot, or food not digesting. That you're sort of in conversation with roiling energy, with your entire culture, your architecture, your language. I don't know as much about the language as you do, but is there a reflection there?
A reflection of what?
Like the concept of the Teotl that you talk about in the way that language is.
Language actually is a way of transmitting life energy, or Teotl. And the principal way actually for the Mexica and other Mesoamerican peoples as well, the principal way of what we would call worshiping or honoring or revering the deities, who are actually not sort of deities in the Western sense, is through song and poetry, through the spoken word. So words are powerful. Unlike we think sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. For them, words actually are causally potent. So the principal way of worshiping the deities is actually through song, spoken word, what we would call prayer. And this is made very clear in a Quiche Maya text called the Popol Vuh, in which the gods there create human beings who can speak properly, because it's only through proper speech that humans can properly nourish and refuel and sustain the so-called gods. So on this view, I mean, those things we call gods are in fact dependent upon human beings. So there's a symbiotic relationship between humans and so-called deities. It's actually, the metaphysics is a form of pantheism, where there's just one thing, Teotl. It's powerful, it's sacred, it's all-encompassing. Everything is ultimately one with it. And what we call deities are simply what some anthropologists call other than human persons, a little less derogatory than non-humans. But so there are all these other than human persons in the world: tables, chairs, cats, dogs, trees, lakes, mountains. And some of those are also people like Quetzalcoatl or Tlaloc, who are typically described as deities, but they're just simply more powerful than human persons. So they create us, but they create us in order to nourish them, because they're exhausted after creating the world. So we're created and we're born indebted to them, because we owe our life and our existence to them. So we then gift back to them various things: spoken word, poetry, song, music, burning copal incense, human hearts and flesh, to be sure, as well as tortillas, amaranth dough figures, a variety of foodstuffs, pulque, right? And they then renourish us through the revitalization of nature, maize, through agriculture. So there's a symbiotic relationship between humans and the so-called deities. We depend upon them and they depend upon us. So there's a very dramatic contrast with the notion of a god. I think even in like Greek, Roman, and Abrahamic religions, where the gods are not dependent upon human beings. This whole idea is modeled upon the symbiotic relationship between cultivated maize and human beings. Maize cannot reproduce without human intervention. If you look at a dried up maize husk, I mean, the corn kernels, the seeds in there are trapped inside that husk and they cannot get out. For maize to reproduce, it requires human intervention. For us to reproduce, we need maize intervention, so to speak. We need to consume maize. So maize and human beings are symbiotic. They're mutually interdependent. And that's the Mexica's model for the relationship between humans and the gods, and actually humans and the whole cosmos. The cosmos cannot reproduce without human beings nourishing it, and we cannot reproduce without the cosmos nourishing us. So when it comes to any sort of notion of, we think of there a sacred profane God versus human distinction, it falls apart, because ultimately we eat the gods in the form of maize and water, and they eat us in the form of our blood or our flesh. So we eat godly stuff, they eat humanly stuff, and you are what you eat. That makes us very, very, actually, at the end of the day, identical, ontologically speaking, in terms of what we're made out of.
We're interlinked. Interlinked, that all of the different aspects of creation are always connected to the next one.
Not just interlinked, but made up of the same stuff. There's no nature supernature distinction. It cuts between that. That's one of these dualisms we get out of Western philosophy.
Yeah, it almost feels like quantum physics, part of it, reading what you're describing.
Yes. I mean, I don't know enough to intelligently address that, but a lot of people would say so. Yeah. There's some really good work done by Andiness named Marisol de la Cadena. She wrote a book called Earth Beings, when she discusses very similar notion in indigenous Andean philosophy, and she does appeal to contemporary quantum mechanics.
You end up, if you follow kind of math or neurology too far to one direction, you sort of end up in metaphor and away from numbers in a way that makes the empiricists sort of frustrated, I think.
Yeah, true enough.
Well, I mean, there's like a present tenseness to the kind of religious process you're describing that is not really in other cultures. I mean, there's if you look at Greek or Norse or something, I mean, there's like a history where the gods did a bunch of stuff and then they quit, and now they've sort of gone to another place, and we still have to sometimes beg them to deign to notice us or show that we remember them to not get punished. But it isn't part of every part of life. It isn't part of food, it isn't part of art, it isn't part of culture in this way that you describe it being in the book. And to me, like, Aztec architecture was almost kind of like overwhelming to look at. Like, when you look at the pictures, it's like pictures within pictures within pictures. Like, it looks like a magic eye. There's a serpent wrapped around the whole building, but the serpent's so big that the pieces of the serpent are making this tableau. But then in that tableau, there's other little things. And so I always thought, when I was younger, well, that's just how they did architecture. But you go back to the Olmecs and the Toltecs, the empires before that, and the architecture looks Greek almost, like the figure of the wrestler they excavated. I mean, it's very kind of traditional. So do you think that architecture is a reflection of the kind of metaphysics you're describing, that all of this stuff is interlinked and put together? I mean, things like the moon disk that they excavated in Tenochtitlan, I mean, that looks like a Picasso painting. It looks like Guernica or something, like, in a way that, it took us hundreds of years to rediscover that kind of impressionistic felt sense of art.
I mean, I think my sense is that the sort of metaphysics that I'm attributing to the Aztecs is actually deeply entrenched within and widely spread within Mesoamerica. So it would be there even in the Olmecs, the Toltecs, Mixtecs, Zapotecs, and Maya as well.
I know there's not a lot of historical record left. There's, the Aztecs are trying to link their leaders to the leaders of the past empire for legitimacy and things. But I mean, from your impression, you can't say anything super concrete a lot of the time, but from your impression, why is the Aztec art architecture so different than
Oh, boy.
Olmec's Toltecs if that uh, metaphysical assumption was not changed?
I guess, I mean, there isn't that much Toltec art around, and it doesn't strike me as all that dissimilar, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, and a lot of the Aztec art is modeled directly after the Toltec art because they did visit Tula, the archaeological remains of Tolan, or where the Toltecs were, and there's lots of art within the so-called sacred precinct, the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan, that modeled closely after it. So I don't think there's a big difference. Olmecs, I mean, yeah, other than that, I don't know why they are different.
Sure.
Their explanation would be that what we're calling art is in fact not art, it's in fact alive. The whole notion of attributing to other cultures a Western notion of art is basically misguided. Those things are all living persons. There's a very famous, well, not so very famous film that when I visited the Humboldt Forum in Germany, in Berlin last summer, there's a quote from a film, I believe it translates as a French film made in the 50s. The French title translates as something like "Even Statues Die," and there was a quote from it right next to the Benin bronzes that the Humboldt Forum owns, and it says, "When men die," right? It's quote, "When men die, they become history. When statues die, they become art." So there's this idea that all these things are alive and that they're living, and that when they get conquered and colonized, we come in and go, "Oh no, that's art," because we're unwilling to see that that dismembered figure at the bottom there is actually probably still alive, and was alive in some sense for the Aztecs. But paintings, sculptures, these things are all alive, and this tends to be pretty much what we call New World wide phenomenon, that Native people see even geometric figures as sort of, in some sense, vivifying and alive. Some patterns are compatible with, you eat out of a bowl with certain patterns, you don't eat out of a bowl with other patterns. The pattern has a causal effect upon things. And so, in a sense, it's energized and vivifying as well. So, and so, yeah, back to, so why the Aztecs would claim that they're painting their gods the way they do, they're building their buildings the way they do because they've been told to do so by the gods. It's not simply a matter of artistic convention or style, individual whimsy. The gods don't let you depict them just any way willy-nilly. There's a specific way in which they want you to do that. So the sculptor, the artist, the painter has these conversations with the gods, and the gods tell them how they wish to be presented, not represented, but presented, because the god's there in all its fullness. Right? The analogy that will come most to mind for us is, think about the Eucharist and communion for Catholics, right? You eat the wafer, that is Jesus's flesh. You drink the wine, that is Jesus's blood. Protestants take over and it becomes symbolic of Jesus's flesh, symbolic of Jesus's blood. But for the Catholics, especially pre-Reformation Catholics, I mean, it's there, and Jesus is in there, and Jesus's flesh and his essence is in there. Analogously, for the Mexica, a statue of, let's say, Tlaloc or Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is right there. That is Quetzalcoatl. It's not a representation, depiction of, symbol of Quetzalcoatl. It is Quetzalcoatl. And you can talk with him one-on-one. So they are presentations, not representations. This whole notion of everything being a symbol or a picture of, a symbol of, a representative of, all comes out of the Protestant Reformation and semiotics, which comes out of that as well. So for them, this stuff is not, strictly speaking, art. Just other persons made out of stone or ink and paper or jade.
Well, a lot that jumps out there that's fascinating. I mean, firstly, that quote that you share seems like you found something that was incredibly in keeping with the philosophy behind your book in that museum. That's a really beautiful statement. And two, it sounds like, the communion is a lot more of a ritual. It is a communing with, but it doesn't change, and it's not up to the participant what it looks like. What you're describing about being told by the gods what kind of art they want to make sounds like a pretty poetic description of intuition, that
Yeah, well, they wouldn't call it intuition because they
sure.
would call it oracular communication.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
I think some Jungians would maybe call intuition that too. Uh,
Who would?
some Jungian analysts that I've met.
Jungians. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, if your worldview assumes the world view of modern natural science, then yeah, all of this talk has to be recast in terms of intuitions or
Mhm.
stuff in the head or symbols. I mean, you've
Mhm.
got to, right. I mean, I don't know about, the deromanticization of nature that happens, right? Weber talks about it and others, right? With modern science,
Mhm.
qualities, colors, tastes, sounds, the magical, all of that, which is in even within European metaphysics, pre Galileo, pre natural science, all of that just gets sucked
Mhm.
out of nature and put into our heads. It's all up here now. It's
Yeah.
not out there because the only thing out there is physics, right? A
Mhm.
world, matter in motion with quantitative properties alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not going to go with you,
Mhm. Yeah.
travel with you to Jungian land or Freudian land or semiotics land because I'm I'm not so much interested in explaining in some sort of scientific or Western sense why they think what they do. I'm trying to understand, in fact, what they do think.
Sure.
And then if you want to explain it this other way, that's fine. But I devote myself to trying to get in their heads and understanding what's going on.
Yeah, no, and I'm not at all trying to pull you out of that experience. I just know a lot of, especially older Jungians that are kind of part of the transpersonal psychology movement view the self not really as an individual, but as a part of systems
Mhm.
interacting with the world and also interacting with the body. It's more of the kind of, uh, you, you know, there I, most of kind of academic psychology, I think, unfortunately, is views the body as this go-kart that carries the brain around, and the brain does all the thinking, and we might as well just pluck it out and put it in the jar because that's all we are.
Brain
there
in the back.
there are alternative psychologies to that,
Yeah.
that are popping up as we try and do things like
Yeah. Yeah.
trauma.
Fair enough.
Um, but so Teo, you say in the book has kind of three main manifestations that sometimes overlap and interact. Could you go through those manifestations of the energy that because I think those are important. Ways to help understand what your point is there.
Here. So Teotl is this sort of constant energy in motion, always changing, always becoming, always moving, always processing. So that foundation gives you a pantheism. It also gives you what Western philosophers call a process metaphysics. The basic stuff of the universe are processes, not things. Right. And this contrasts with the dominant mode in Western philosophy, starting with Plato at least, that the building blocks of the world are things of one kind or another that are permanent. They can be atoms. For Plato, they could be forms. We could think they're substances, entities, things, but the furniture of the universe consists of things.
Hmm.
Process metaphysics argues that the furniture, if that's appropriate, of the universe are processes,
Hmm.
parades, seasons, rainfalls, waterfalls, floodings, things going on. So the world is always moving, always changing, always transforming into something else. So the three patterns that Teotl adopts in this, and motion here also includes change, right?
Hmm.
We think of motion as just going from point A to point B, but if you go back to Aristotle, changing through, let's say, moving through the life cycle from infancy to, to young adulthood to old age. That's a kind of movement. So they agree on that. So there's not only physical movement from point A to point B, but there's also motion in the sense of going through a life change, them, aging, dying, life renewal.
Mhm.
So there's three patterns. One is called Oline, and it is the kind of motion which it's exhibited by a bouncing ball. It's sort of is this parabolic like that? As I recall, yeah. Bouncing ball, beating heart. It's also the motion through the 4 stages of our life cycle. So there's a kind of specific motion, and they depict it in a particular kind of way.
So it's like an oscillation almost.
Yeah,
Anything that's bouncing between
yeah,
two
and the sun going
points.
up and down and up and down, up and over, up and over, up
Mhm.
and over the surface of the earth. That is the pattern, or how Teotl moves in that particular way.
Would any kind of philosophical or natural paradox be seen as that? I know you don't mention that in the book, but it was a
Any
question I had.
paradoxes?
Yeah, the idea that you have two things that are paradoxical but both true or something, is that ever brought up in any kind of cultural or literary?
I don't think so. Not at least concerning Oline.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. Then there's another kind of motion change, pattern of motion change, right? It's different, not a different kind of energy, but a different pattern of this Teotl's constant moving and becoming, which is spiraling. Well, they call that Malinali. And that's the pattern of energy it takes for transmitting energy between levels of the cosmos, the levels of the universe. So if I want to, get energy going up if I want to transmit life energy to the gods up, since they reside above me, I spin it, I order it, I do that. And that is how energy is transmitted from below the earth to the surface of the earth, above the earth.
You
And
said that was how they viewed digestion, was a whirling of food into
right,
the
because
body, kind of.
fire is conceived as that, and they see fire as a act, as a burning, as
So
a
I was wondering if some of the sacrifice rituals couldn't almost be like a reverse digestion, that you're taking a
reverse.
living thing and spiraling it back up into this cosmic energy to feed the gods.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know about reverse digestion, but I
Well,
mean,
I'm thinking
digest.
of, you take the food and you put it into the person to make the person, that's sort of
Oh,
taking the
yeah,
food out of the person to put it back into the
yeah.
gods.
Well, I mean, reverse just to say that it's cyclical, right?
Mhm.
You're always, we're always meant to be recycling the life energies which the gods have given us, recycling them back to them. So, yeah, you're right. One of the more sort of dramatic examples is there's so-called gladiator stone. You can look it up, but it's once again not appropriately called that. But was a circular, like a pedestal, on which captured warrior would engage in combat, ritual combat. But they had actual weapons with Mexica warriors. And what they would do is spin them around. They'd rotate around, round and around this circular pedestal, and in the process also try to kill him at first, but just to what they would call stripe him, to nick him so that he would bleed and spread his blood around this thing. And this thing, actually, the word for it is the word for a spindle whorl. And a spindle whorl, as you know, is the heavy weight you put in the bottom of a spindle rod when you're spinning raw cotton into spun cotton, and it's a way of ordering. So what they did was they spun him around like this, and that would in fact transmit the energy in his blood up to the cosmos. So yeah, that's one of the ways they recycled it.
Well, I think when someone's saying, "Oh, this is so alien and bizarre and brutal," or something, but when you're understanding these assumptions as that the universe, excuse me, is always being sustained by itself and going through these things, and it's our job to sustain it. I mean, you're just taking the heart back out of the body, giving it back to the gods. Unfortunately, this guy lost the flower war now, and then later that will be me. And there was a sense of being comfortable, even if the individual maybe didn't like it, the society was comfortable and natural with it as just this inevitable thing that's kind of going to happen anyway. You know, I'm thinking of that, like, what is it in the Bhagavad Gita, um, where the line where the guy's like, I don't really want to fight all these people. Like, it just seems like a mean thing to kill all of them. And, you know, Shiva says, even without your sword, behold, I have become time. Even without your sword, all of these men will crumble and turn into dust. What you do is nothing.
Huh.
You know?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I mean, there's not an eventuality in the Aztec case, at least to the extent I understand the eventuality in the example you just gave. This stuff isn't going to happen eventually unless, because human beings actually need to intervene,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Beyond the continuing existence of the cosmos, all of nature, as we would call it, requires human participation and intervention.
And I'm
And
not
we're, as human beings, created specifically for that job.
sure.
That's our purpose. Um, so
I'm not trying to compare it to Hinduism in that way, but I do want to try and reach the person who still is not feels disconnected from this set of assumptions as part of
yeah,
something that they can understand.
for sure. And I think it would be mistaken to think that everybody was on board, especially, I mean, especially some of the victims or heart donors, unwilling heart donors. The warriors, you're right. That was part of a warrior cult, military cult. That was part of the honor. You either die in the battlefield or die on the sacrificial stone.
Hmm.
And they had if they died that way, they had a very honorable post-mortem existence of accompanying the sun for
Hmm.
several years every morning, and then eventually becoming monarch butterflies.
Hmm.
Um, but for the rest of there were, people who had not chattel slavery, but people who had been bought maybe because, they owed a lot of money. And those people could be sold to someone else for a sacrifice. And I'm sure they weren't keen on it. Um,
Well, and I know Campbell used to say that all mythology has to do with dealing with guilt or shame. I don't know that I'd go that far, but a lot of it is us kind of trying to have a story about things that we have to do anyway. And
huh.
I mean, it was an empire, and when the
Yeah.
empires work by expanding, and then when they hit a uh, either geographic or cultural or economic boundary where they can't expand anymore, either the empire falls or the front
Uh-huh.
comes home. And when
Uh-huh.
that front is coming home, you have to have some sort of sustaining game where the empire can imperialize itself. And these flower wars were basically a way to continue to have, we're going to go out, we're going to kill the dark, bad, scary other, we're going to bring it back in, except, well, they're just kind of symbolic of that. Actually, these are football games. You know, we're going to because the point of the flower wars was not to go out and kill a bunch of people, it
No.
was to capture them. That's what you got rewarded
Right.
for, and then
But the
you
other side
build the
felt the same
yeah.
way, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
a one-way street. Their
Mhm.
flower wars with the people from Tlaxcala, right? They went out in order to seize Aztec warriors for the very same purpose. So it was a mutually agreed upon thing. It wasn't just the Aztecs terrorizing the Tlaxcaltecans.
Are you familiar with, like, the role that football plays in the American South, the SEC? Have you at least heard of this, religious experience that we do?
No, I haven't.
Uh, if you ever, I'm not a huge football fan, other than I like cultural anthropology. But if you ever get a chance to come to Alabama and see what a game is like in Tuscaloosa, I wonder if you don't think about the flower wars and the role that
Wow.
they play. I mean,
It's a
uh,
bloodletting sport, is it?
it, I don't mean just in the violence, but I mean the cultural role where it's like when I told my wife when she moved from Indiana, like when you go to your school, the elementary school kids are going to say, "Who do you go for?" And that
Yeah.
means which football team do you like? And they're going to form an opinion of you based on what you say and have an animosity to that you're going to be like, no, 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 it's okay because she doesn't like conflict. And then I took her to Tuscaloosa to see a game when she was looking at the quad, and they've rented out for an insane amount of money just a teeny tiny little square on the grass. And people who don't have a ticket to the game, this isn't the stadium, this is the quad of the college, have brought their entire living room, a generator, their lamp, their couch, their big screen, their barbecue grill, and they're just sitting in a recreation of their living room closer to Mecca where you
Wow.
can hear the roar of the stadium with a slight delay on your TV and coming directly from the stadium behind you that you don't have a ticket to get into.
Wow.
So
That's,
I don't know. It makes a lot of your book reminded me of that.
wow.
A lot of Aztec culture.
I should get to the third pattern since you asked. The third one is called
Sorry to go
Nepantla.
down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. And it's back and forth motion. It's the motion between, I mean, actually in battle, right? Thrust, parry, thrust, parry, thrust, parry. It's the motion involved in weaving. It's the motion back, forth involved in sexual intercourse. It's a motion that the Mexica see as creating this in-between space, not in a liminal negative way, but it's in a positive way, that in this in-between space, something new is created. A third thing, a tertium quid, is created. But in sexual intercourse, that third thing is created as a child, and also a union between these two people, which otherwise doesn't exist. When it comes to weaving together, warp and weft creates this new thing, a woven shirt, right? And that is one of the most powerful ones because that's involved in balancing. So it's that back, forth, which actually is then also typified in the constant gifting, regifting between humans and gods. They gift us life, we gift them life. When you accept a gift, you're obliged to regift. So there's this constant sort of back, forth mutuality of gifting. I gift you, you gift me, I gift you, you gift me. I invite you to dinner. If you're good manners, you invite me back over to dinner. We go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that creates this unity of interrelatedness between humans and gods. But it also is the model for all human interactions. This mutual gifting. Teachers gift life energy to their students. They are therefore indebted, and they are obliged to re-gift something back to their teachers. Parents gift their children lives. Children are obliged to re-gift by taking care of them in their old age. So this notion of this mutual exchange, re-gifting and re-gifting of life energy is very, very central to interhuman relationships and human divine relationships as well. And that's the third kind of motion. And so this one actually is very defining of the cosmos itself, because the Aztecs see the cosmos basically as a woven fabric. And it's woven through all these various kinds of actions of human beings and interactions. So despite the Aztecs' reputation as being bloodthirsty warrior cult, I mean, one of the basic metaphors, but I don't think it is a metaphor, that's our talk, is that the cosmos is this weaving in progress, this back forth between polarities, male, female, life, death, hot, cold, day, night, winter, summer. You want to keep that back and forth going in this balanced way, and that maintains the cosmos in a balanced state.
It almost sounds like a description of philosophy itself, too. That one person has this discourse with this other person, another thing is created. The thesis,
ideally,
synthesis.
Yeah. I mean, it's also very similar to Taoism. You probably heard you already. These dualities, these polarities are like yin yang. They're mutually arising, mutually interdependent. Death arises from life arises from death. You can't be alive without killing something, and you can't be dead unless you are alive. So there's this notion that these dualities or polarities go back and forth, and that they form a unified duality or a dual unity. They don't disappear, but they form this tertium quid, this third thing. And so that's very, very fundamental to it, maintaining this circulation, this cyclical day, night, winter, summer, male, female, life, death, just going on and on. And that's what the cosmos is, this cyclical alternation between these mutually rising, mutually interdependent polarities or dualities. And the idea that you could have something like life without death, eternal life, Christian style, is just quite literally nonsensical. It's conceptually absurd. It's like being a brother, an only child and a brother, right? You can't be a brother unless you have a brother, right? And having God be just a man is just as incoherent as a single child brother, because reproduction requires male-female interaction, right? So how could you possibly just have a male create the universe by himself? It literally makes no sense. It's absurd.
They don't see the disconnection of opposites or time in the way that a lot
No,
of other
no.
do you think some of that was influenced by there being like kind of like less written language accessible, that most interaction is verbal, that the civilization is smaller? Do you see any kind of cultural reality reinforcing that belief, or just kind of a product of the culture that didn't come from anything
I
material
mean, if
like
you're
that?
looking for the outside explanation, I mean, I think it goes back to maize agriculture. Humans can't reproduce without maize. Maize can't reproduce without humans. Right? That is like the keystone to understanding how they conceive the universe, and that's shared throughout Mesoamerica. That the fundamentalness of the human maize relationship. The Mayas, many argue, did have a written language and embrace the same idea.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the dominance of orality which explains it.
Yeah, and maize is so important to just why the civilization was able to be there. If you go further north in
Yeah.
America, you're spending all your time kind of hunting and gathering. You're not gonna but you don't have the luxury of building a pyramid just with time, but you also may have to move from the place where you built it. So that
Yeah,
it's
but
kind
you
of a
get
unique.
maize agriculture in North America,
They
and you
did.
get Cahokia. You got lots of large ceremonial centers, Chaco Canyon, going on Canyon de Chelly, Cahokia.
I live close to Moundville. And
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so they may have. I mean, I strikes me that Cahokia had to be largely maize dependent. It was anytime you have a settled existence, you're a farmer.
You're farming.
And maize is there, and maize traveled down to South America and up to North America. It is. I guess just talk with a guy who told me that he thinks that maize went down to the Andes and then a different species went back up north. So it's a really complicated history. But yeah, I think humans in the Americas, ended up transforming something called tzitzintle, which is basically a wild grass seed, into what we think of as maize about 6,000 years
The
ago.
corn started off about that big. It was a
Yeah,
little kind of fat wheat berries was
yeah,
what it
yeah.
was.
Not, yeah, at best.
Well, and it's across all of North and South America, but the ability to farm it and the quantity to have the surplus really was
Yeah,
kind of a luxury of that region. And some of that was agricultural, the farmland and the weather patterns and all that, but other parts of it and maybe access to certain varieties of it where they didn't know have that ability. But there's also the Aztecs' ability to like soaking maize in lye to create hominy and preserving it,
yeah.
and just things that were a technological product that had not really traveled that far.
I mean, I think it was throughout the Americas. Everybody.
Hominy was everywhere. I
Yeah,
always
I think so.
associated
Yeah.
it with
I
southern,
think it
with like,
was succotash, if I'm not mistaken, is hominy,
huh?
I
I don't know that
believe.
one specifically. I'll have to look that up. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
No, but I mean, it's Europeans when they brought it back to Europe didn't know they needed to soak it in lime and ended up, I forget the name of the disease that you get from niacin deficiency from
Scurvy.
not soaking scurvy.
Is it scurvy? I know
No, that's vitamin C
that's
deficiency.
vitamin C. Yeah, I don't know.
It, and it took them a while to figure it out.
Hmm.
So
And-
no, I don't know how they discovered that, but the making of what's called nishtamal is yeah, I think it's all over.
Okay. Huh. I always associated that Aztec, the Mesoamerican region, with just increased uh, output
Well,
agriculturally,
they do
which
have increased output. I mean,
yeah.
that's true, and especially the Aztecs had. And but I mean, as you said, anytime you have settled existence and then have the what can afford the surplus labor to be building monumental architecture, you've got production which exceeds a certain level. So you're absolutely right. But I mean, that's also true of the Andes.
Yeah.
And yeah, mound culture, Cahokia.
I don't know if it's apocryphal because I'm not an academic, and so I don't have to cite sources and things. No one's gonna give me an F, but if I get it wrong. But I had like a history teacher a long time ago tell me about some story where the Spanish were like, show us the gods. What are the gods? Where are the gods? And they like take them to some statue or carving, and the Spanish smashed it, and the Aztecs are just kind of blasé, and they're like, look at the gods, and they're like, no, the gods are not here. And then they think they're lied to or something, and they're like, where are they? What are the gods? And the Aztecs just think they're stupid. They're like, this is what they look like. Here you go. Here's the picture of the process. And the
Huh.
Spanish keep trying to deface these things, and then they don't understand because they think it's like stepping on the cross or breaking an idol. And the Aztecs are just kind of like, this is a blueprint of the universe, man. Like, and you're tearing up a piece of paper. I don't understand what you want me to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know that story,
It
but
may not be true. It may be
um,
an
I mean,
allegorical.
they wouldn't be very happy about you coming in and smashing the statue if the statue, in fact, were a presentation rather than just a picture.
Hmm.
But that destroying the statue would by no means destroying the god, right?
Hmm.
'Cause, I mean, take Tlaloc, right? He was associated with rain, water,
Hmm.
ice, hailstorms, thunder, lightning. I mean, all of Tlaloc is in all of those exemplifications, all everywhere, all at once, in different times and places. So all of
Hmm.
Tlaloc's in a rainstorm in Alabama, while also all of Tlaloc is in a rainstorm in North Dakota.
So,
Um,
if you could rewind time and go live in the Aztec Empire, you think you'd do that?
uh, uh, I mean, just as for an exploratory thing for a couple weeks, yeah, I'd like to do that, especially if I were an elite priest, maybe, or an elite person. I think the life of commoners was hard. They worked hard. Maize agriculture is a demanding life. Personally, I wouldn't have wanted to be a warrior. It's just not my thing. So yeah, I could see doing it. Yeah. I mean, I can say that about just about everywhere, I think.
Hmm.
Would you?
I don't know. I don't know. There's something about the veil to me that seems scary there. Like
The
I kind of
veil?
like the veil of time of uncertainty that I can talk about this and intuitively interact with it. But if you really go back, if you really know and you see something, I don't know. I
Hmm.
feel like there's something about that scares me.
Huh. Yeah, I think it'd be neat. Intriguing. I mean, I guess we're assuming that I retain all my current sensibilities and stuff, so that when I saw heart sacrifice, I would be appalled and yeah, that would be hard to watch for sure.
You don't want to meet your heroes, or in this case, your academic area of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I I think like conspiracy theory is fascinating, though I don't really go in for it. And a lot of pseudo archaeology is always like caught up in conspiracy theory a ton of the time. That
Yeah.
some combination of aliens and 5G and pyramids and stuff. But
Yeah.
I am curious. Like I know that there's the Toltec story that they have. Basically, the Toltec Empire falls apart when one of the emperors is drinking too much, and they put him on a boat and send him to North America. I mean, do you think that him and that retinue got up there? Do you think that there's anything that, I've heard people before, because a lot of it on its face, it just fails conceptually. But the people that say, like, well, the reason why in the Four Corners you end up with things that you don't associate with a lot of North American culture just all end up there, like cannibalism and architecture and different things, is because this Toltec emperor went up there and introduced this information. I don't really believe that that's plausible, but it's one of the only ones that on the face of it, I can't say, well, that's wrong for this fundamental
Yeah.
reason.
I've never heard. I mean, I know of the story of a guy named Quetzalcoatltzin, who was the ruler of Tolan, the Toltec emperor, and that he allegedly had too much pulque to drink, and I guess attempted to seduce his sister, but then he left voluntarily in shame. to the east, and then and and then that gets turned into this idea that Cortez is, of course, his returning.
Mm.
How much of that is true? It's not clear because our sources claiming that are all post-conquest sources, and a lot of them are either written by Spaniards or written by mestizos, Spanish Indian people, or
Mm-hmm.
by the surviving, the children, the grandchildren of the elite of various other city states in the area who are out to make the Aztecs look bad, horrific, stupid, and
And
out
it's
to
increases
fuck up with the
Spanish
Spaniards.
claim to overthrow the empire if he's an emperor coming back too.
What
It's a
say that?
it's a beneficial story to Cortez that he's
Yeah,
returning
if
as a
it's true,
yeah.
but I mean, it looks post facto, post conquest, sort of is a post facto sort of
Yeah.
justification rather than one that was there before. Most of the, there are all these omens that Moctezuma II supposedly saw, birds with this, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. But scholars have examined those, and those are straight out of medieval Europe.
Yeah.
And then so somebody wrote up these things and said, oh, yeah, and the Aztecs thought that too.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
you
but we
have to
don't.
be very, very careful with the sources because, like I say, a lot of the sources are written, and that's important because not everybody could write. Even after the invasion, only the elite, the sons, and maybe the daughters, but probably just the sons of the elite of various city states were brought in by the Franciscans and taught how to read and write, taught Spanish and Latin, and they tended to write stories which were self-serving
Mm.
because now, I mean, in a lot of ways, the social, political, economic structure of New Spain remained the same when it was Tenochtitlan, when it was the Aztec Empire. We just had a new boss
Mm.
in town. The Spanish emperor was now the top dog rather than the Tlatoani, the ruler of the Aztec Empire. But so all the nobility are trying to suck up, maintain, they live a rather lavish lifestyle. They live off the labor of the commoners who are the maize farmers, and they want to retain all of that. So they're trying to suck up to the king and the Spaniards. There's this jockeying for position and power taking place, and they don't want to be reduced to commoners.
Mm-hmm.
So they're writing things that make their ancestors look smart and not
Mm-hmm.
non-barbarous. It was the Aztecs who did all that horrible stuff, or just very,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's the
Yeah.
sources are very dicey, so you have to be
That
careful.
makes sense. I never thought about the post invasion politics of trying
Yeah,
to play Spanish politics with your own history as a Mesoamerican. That's
yeah.
yeah. Do you the hinge point in history where Cortez basically breaks the rules and invades without permission? I mean, it's kind of amazing what that he even was able to do that with so few people. And that almost didn't happen for a lot of reasons. I mean, they came after him for trying to
The Spanish came
yeah.
after him.
The
Yeah,
Spanish came after him for trying to break the rules, but if he doesn't do that, what do you think happens? I mean, it's likely that at some point somebody goes in, that empire does fall. I mean, how long do you think they get, and what do you think that changes if Cortez is just deleted from the
mm.
record, and you have ships knocking around across the Caribbean discovering
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah.
Um,
It appears as if it weren't him, it would have been somebody else. Um, the people, the tributaries of the Aztecs, right? All these smaller city states around, the greater Mexico, were not happy. And no colonized people are happy having to pay tribute to an imperial power. There were the flower wars, but not everybody engaged in those. But they weren't happy. So sooner or later, someone would have done the same divide and conquer sort of strategy. I mean, and you got to remember that they all saw themselves what scholars call the micro patriotism in Mexico, that people identify with a city
yeah.
as opposed to the nation. And pre
Austria is kind of like that. If you ever go to
what's that?
Austria is kind of like that. If you ever
Huh.
go to Austria, they want you to be into their team and their beer and their region. But they don't really like the bigger Austria.
Yeah, I mean,
They like
yeah,
you like
there's
Steiermark or
micro
something.
patriotism with
Yeah.
UANFL. Yeah, so So they didn't all see themselves as like, we're indigenous people, we have to unite to expel the foreigner. They saw themselves as, I'm from Tlaxcala, I'm from Cholula, I'm from here, there, right? And there was just like, let's get rid of the Aztecs. This guy promises to do it. But then, unfortunately, you know, the ideal state, which I think they thought was going to result, didn't happen because they just got sucked within the Spanish Empire and probably poorly treated as they were before, probably even worse, given the death toll after the conquest.
Yeah, it was horrific.
Yeah, and there's also like breaking up of communities, forcing them into encomiendas, sort of forced plantation systems, what's called reducciones. Yeah, so they all.
I don't know the name of the movement. The only reason I know about it is because there was the guy who catered my like grad party at Swanee had this collection of artwork, but he was telling me that it was like the Spanish had taught first generation people after the conquest to paint European style, but and they could understand the proportion and the perspective and the math of it, but they couldn't ever get them to get European color. So it would be these pictures of like basically noble women and babies and things, but the colors, it's hard to describe because you can't say, oh, they're breaking one rule, but it was like the whole notion of how you colored it didn't look like that period that your brain wanted to say, oh, that's what this is. It had a kind of blending of earth tones that just was kind of atypical. I forget the name of it. That's the only place I've ever encountered it. Was he was showing me some of his collection, but
Boy, yeah, I don't know.
I
can't
so
think of
interesting.
anything like that.
There's all these parts of our culture we just can't even see, see them like in that way. But
yeah,
is there anywhere we don't get? Is there anything you feel like is an important thing, something you want to jump back to, or a piece that I don't?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, no, I think we've covered things. I mean, I guess the sort of obsessive focusing upon human sacrifice is not very helpful. I mean, it's there. I think we attribute more centrality to it than they did. I mean, these ceremonies lasted an entire month. They were, very extremely religious people. When the Franciscans arrived, they were like, wow, these people are more religious than Europeans are. They just happen to have been tricked by the devil. So we got to switch out the devil with Jesus. But so there were lots of things going on, and the heart sacrifice was one part of it, undeniably so. The notion of sacrifice itself doesn't quite apply because it literally means to make sacred, sacrificere, and for them everything already is sacred. So that whole notion of doesn't apply. You can just see that as, in lots of cases, unwilling heart donors, gifting their life energies to the cosmos. But it's not just this slavish thing like, oh, we got to appease the gods or they're going to kill us and punish us. That's all Abrahamic. There's
the perception that Westerners have that if they didn't kill the person, the sun wouldn't come up. I think the fear of the sun not coming up. Your book does a great job of saying that this is a reenactment of a reenactment of a reenactment of the processes of the universe,
Yeah. Yeah, it's true that the sun won't, but it isn't because the sun's pissed off. And it's like, F you guys, I'm not going to rise today. It's like the sun just starved to death. The sun doesn't have the energy to be reborn in every morning unless we feed it. So, it's really a very sort of basic sort of agricultural or horticultural model of humans and nature interacting. And we have to gift back to it in order for it to gift us. And contemporary Nahuatl speakers in Mexico would argue that Western culture isn't doing a very good job of that. That climate change, they're very much aware of it as dirt farmers, is the result of a gross imbalance, a failure to reciprocate, that give and take, give back, I give to you, you give to me. So that's really where all of that, the gory, horrid stuff is coming from, is this idea that we have to give back to keep the thing going. And
Well, there's probably a political element too, that we tend to punch down on ancient empires' bloodiness or
yeah,
fixate on their
yeah.
bloody aspects to overlook where modern empires are extremely
Oh my
bloody, if
God.
not worse.
Yeah, we don't need to state the obvious,
Mhm.
the elephant
Nope.
in the room. No, God, good Lord, no. Yeah, I mean, from the get-go, the Spaniards were out to present New World people as cannibals, sodomites. Um, what else? Those were enough to condemn them to death, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, we're always making other people out to be bloody, and we're sacred and holy, and we respect and revere life, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
for sure.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation with you. I really appreciate your
Yeah,
time,
sure.
and I wish that I had a podcast, 3, 4 years ago when I first picked up your book. You wanted to say anything about the next one, or you got anything in the works that you want us to link to? I'll definitely link to where the book can be purchased. You have a website or any other kind of web presence where you'd like me to direct people?
Unfortunately, I'm not digital savvy enough to have a website.
Okay.
I can send you some articles or a
Okay.
link to some articles on an ethics. So right now I'm working on, well, you're probably familiar with, well, the skull
Mm-hmm.
rack, right? Well, I'm arguing that in fact it's a maize field,
Mm.
and that it's not. I mean, the standard interpretation is going to be that it's like this gory trophy display. It's there to like intimidate everybody. Oh, we Aztecs are bad mofos. Look at all these heads we've accumulated. And it's not that at all. I mean, it may have that effect on some people, but it's only because the thing itself is inherently powerful. And it's
Mm.
powerful because those skulls are conceived as maize kernels.
Mm.
And so the whole thing is basically a cosmic milpa, and that it's
Mm.
the end stage of all the processes going on in the ceremonial precinct, the center of Tenochtitlan. And those are seeds about to be reseeded to regenerate nature.
Mm.
Working on a book which argues that I got too many things going on.
Mm.
Images in the codices, these books like this,
Mm-hmm.
that these are in fact alive. They're not just painted representations or depictions or symbols or pictures. They are living beings. And that person who knows what they're doing interacts with these. This is an oracular device. You
Mm.
take the requisite psychotropic substance, peyote, ulu, I never pronounce this word, Jimson weed, and you can talk with these people. So they're not. This is another example of when statues die, they become art. When these die, they become images for art historians.
Well, and that's what a lot of modern scholarship feels like cave paintings would have been used for prehistorically, that the fire animates the animal you paint or the shaman
Yeah,
doing the ritual, and sometimes maybe you find the right thing to be a little, under the influence of a
yeah,
psychedelic too.
yep. You go and you talk to them.
So would that be on vellum or on the wall? You're saying that you would open the book and have
Yeah, this
taken
is.
the Jimson weed and you would see
Oh,
a
you go to one
hallucination.
page at a time. Yeah. Yeah, on vellum. Sometimes it's on paper, sometimes it's on deerskin. Yeah.
Mhm. And
Um,
the picture is alive, it just isn't gonna talk to you until you take
right.
the right substance.
Yeah. And yeah, you got to prepare yourself. Not anybody can walk in and start talking. You have to be trained. You have to know, you have to go through various sorts of what we would rituals like abstinence,
Mhm.
sexual abstinence, fasting, perhaps self bloodletting, various ways in which they would describe as deserving or meriting
Mm.
conversation. You have to make yourself worthy of talking with the gods on that page. And then you take the relevant entheogen, and you can have, and it's an oracular conversation. You talk to them. Typically, right, these were used for, you're going to want to go to war, go on a military expedition, a mercantile expedition, want to get married. you go to what we call diviner and say, look at it, when's a good time to do that? Was today a good time to do that? And so you talk to that person, and he then does all of those things and talks to these persons. And they say, nah, it's not a very good day. Or if you want us to cooperate, you're going to have to gift us certain sorts of things. So it's a matter of enlisting these other than human persons, enlisting them in your practical endeavors so that they're on your side, not sort of opposing you.
Wow.
So you have to gift them, right? So that they gift you back the cooperation you desire.
Yeah, but you're interacting with a vast series of processes. Almost like some people use tarot or something like that in order to get outside of themselves.
I don't know a lot about tarot, but
different forces. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the historic use, and more so than we think about, and then the modern use, is not really to see the future or to do divination. It's just to understand yourself and your life as a series of forces, and then get outside of your own head about that enough to get them on your side, or make them conscious of, depending on what your language is.
Yeah, this isn't about divining the future. This is about figuring out who are the players today. Right.
Well, that's a really beautiful description, and best of luck with your work. We look forward to your work on ethics, and also the living art. I don't know. I don't
living art.
You got titles? You got what you're gonna call them, or how far along are you through the?
Well, the skull rack is something like, it's called in Nahua. Well, I guess I can't give it a Nahua name in a book because nobody will know what it is. Skull rack, as I can't even say milpa. I'm gonna have to say as cosmic maize field, something like that. The one is conversing with time, Aztec. I forget I've got a title. No, I don't know.
All right. Well, good luck. Yeah. I'll never look at a corn kernel the same again.
Okay. Well, good. Thanks a lot.
And if you ever, when those come out, or when you got a date on that, if you ever want to come back and promote something in a year or so, please send me an email.
Okay, I'll let you know if I ever get down to Alabama.
In